Hi everyone. So today we are here with a slightly different format. It's going to be called the 4.0 Super Impact Series. It's going to be a roundtable event where we are going to be discussing a topic that often doesn't get talked about enough, but is very very relevant, very poignant right now, especially with like a global tech skills gap. And that topic is going to be addressing the gender gap in the IT sector. So joined by a few people today, so I think it probably makes sense for us all to just do a quick round robin, brief introduction as to who you are and the company that you represent. So yeah, look, Nils, if you'd like to kick off.
Yep. Hi. Thanks for the invite. I'm Nils. I'm one of the founders of Hybrid. Hybrid is a green tech startup that focuses on energy efficiency, and we're doing that by deploying energy savings as a service so that customers have net savings from day one, and obviously they improve also their carbon footprint by using less energy.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to jump on next?
I can go, I'll follow. Hi everyone, thank you for the invite. My name is Victoire, I'm representing SQUAKE today. We are a Berlin-based company. We create technology that helps companies and people from the travel and logistics sector to understand their emissions and act upon them. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Aina. I represent MOWEA. It's a Berlin-based startup, and it's small modular wind energy solutions for existing infrastructures. Yeah, and I'm representing marketing department, and happy to talk about gender gaps. Yeah, thanks.
And I'm Johannes, founder CEO at Solytic. Solytic is a software solution for solar installers with a focus on service and maintenance. And also from my side, thanks for this amazing roundtable and the initiative behind it.
Good. Michael, you don't need to introduce yourself. Michael and Leighton, 4.0 BTech climate recruitment or ClimateTech recruitment, focused predominantly in Germany, specifically Berlin. Look, good stuff. Look, thanks guys. Thanks for the brief introduction. Look, happy just to jump straight into it. So we're here to talk about addressing the the gender gap within the IT sector. I mean, it's important to kind of set the scene now. So there was a recent McKinsey study back end of last year that suggests that as an estimate, the skills gap within the IT sector is going to be somewhere north of 1.5 million, probably nearer to 4 million by the end of 2027. So that's 4 million, open vacancies that are not being filled. So that's 4 million gaps in teams, engineers, product people, etc. You're all representing or working for or founders of, early stage tech ventures. So that is, it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on all of our businesses. So I feel like it's quite an important topic for us to address. If another stat which is quite interesting is that it's circa 22, I think it's just under 22% of the people working in tech in Europe are females, but in Germany it's actually less than that. It's just over 19%. 1 in 5 founders of new tech businesses in Germany are females, which again is shows that they're massively underrepresented. So I think the first thing is what are people's thoughts about that? We're aware of such a gender gap.
Maybe I can just jump in. I mean, this has actually been on the news in Germany in the last few days, the shortage of IT qualified personnel and how much of an even bigger issue it's going to be in future. So, I mean, it is definitely a topic that needs to be addressed. And I suppose without, diverging too far from the topic, it's about what happens in school already, right? I mean, it's the tendency that it's more dominated by boys. The technical subjects starts very early, and goes on then of course into university. And then, of course, people who have studied anything tech related are more likely to do something in tech. So, I mean, it's not a must, but it's just a tendency that is proven. And so, I mean, one suggestion is it's not my idea, but it's been around for a while to make technical subjects in school in divided classes, so that women or girls they have more fun doing it and feel less under pressure from peers, usually the boys. So I mean, we need to start very early on, because that's where it all begins, right?
Yeah. Look, there's been a reduction in females actually studying STEM subjects. And those that do study STEM subjects, there's a real lack of them actually then moving into jobs which are, you know, related to the subjects in which they studied. So it's look, it is a real problem from, I suppose, from a grassroots level. Victoria, so what's your what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I agree with everything that Nils was just saying, and I think it's one of the huge, like the bigger pillar of the problem here. But I think when we look at gender gap in climate tech, there's 4 things to look into. The first one is the pipeline, for sure, and like bringing those talents along, education, to just consider that path until getting the right education at the right time and then get ready to the job market. There's also, and we've discussed that together before, like also founding female founders and how we promote that as well, because climate tech is a lot of startups, a lot of new companies and new businesses, and so this also needs to be improved. Third, it's about attracting those talents in your startup. So once the pipeline of talent reaches the job market, how do you create conditions for women, and what does that mean to create conditions for women to apply to these companies and thrive in the companies? And then the last one, the 4th pillar, is always retention. We know that startups, they have a way higher turnover rate than normal companies. And so how do you create also conditions for that gender gap to be bridged over time as well? And so I think there's so much to be done in each of these 4 pillars that we could literally discuss that for hours. So curious to hear what the other things are the most urgent to tackle.
Absolutely. Who wants to jump in?
I would like to add, of course, like others told about a broader picture. And I think it's very important to also to focus on what we can influence, like directly, like as a startup in our field, in our business, and like what we do directly, like what we can directly influence, like who are we hiring and how the processes in the company are built. I think it's important to divide what we can directly influence from what we can't influence directly, and focus on what we can do, like shorter term or longer term.
Yeah. Fair points. I mean, that I guess that segues in quite nicely into the next point. So on the topic of focusing on what we can do or what can be done, look, what are people doing? What are people doing at the moment in order to promote that? Maybe we could jump to you, Johannes. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways to promote in general in an equal setting for everyone, and of course different people have different needs, and therefore it's not just about gender, it's about everything, but it's also about personal life choices that you take at some point in time, and a life plan can change. So it's very much about how we deal with these things and changes. And as a startup, you are quite agile anyway. You have to build and iterate all the time. So giving flexibility, from my point of view, is actually something that we should be able to do quite easily. So we are, most of the time, we're super digital already. For us, when the pandemic hit, it took us half an hour until everyone was home and we could just continue working. So for a larger company with a lot of legacy, it's a very different setting. But we apply the same when it comes to changes in life plans for our employees. And of course, when when a woman decides to become a mother, and I mean that's a journey. There's quite some effort behind it. It's a lot of work, and there are many appointments that you just have to take, and you cannot choose when. And as a company, I think it's very important that you just manage this actively, and that everybody in the company is aware of it, that everybody agrees to this. You know, there are just things in life that are more important than any piece of business at any time. So this is what I learned also from other more senior founders, and communicating openly about it. I think making best practices transparent, sharing this, also putting some pressure on those who don't follow, I think is quite a good way forward, and creating standards that actually meet this demand, because as you just mentioned, we have a huge shortage in talent, and it's getting worse in the future. If we cut out 50% of our society, it's really a stupid thing to do from a very economic perspective. So you know, anything that is in our hands, I agree to that point very much. As a startup, we should be able to do a lot when it comes to flexibility, when it comes to schedules and so forth. But of course, there's more that you can do, most likely, and it's depending on which seniority your startup has. If you're a small startup, you can do a few things. If you're a large company, you can do other things. And if you're in the government, you can tackle very different components to it as well.
Well, is there anything? Is there any one thing that you're doing specifically, or that you've done specifically, that you've seen as delivered real benefit? You know, and whether that is internally or whether that's externally in terms of communicating the message to, you know, people, you know, would be prospective employees, you know, trying to attract them to your business.
I think the one thing that really adds up for us is you know, focusing on outcome. People, you know, we agree on goals, and especially women, and especially when they are mothers, they are really good at this. You know, getting stuff done on time. The productivity of women is, in average, I would say, higher in tech, at least from my perspective, at least from my experience. So even we get less applications from women, the quality in average is much higher. But that's the same experience I made during my chemical engineering studies. We had 15% women, but you know, almost all of them were great, because you have more focus. So taking every person as a single person and adapting to the individual needs, of course, in compliance and in alignment with the business needs and everything, but still listening to the single person and listening to the individual needs, I think is something we just need to become used to. It's not one size fits all, never.
Yes, that's a really interesting point, because I mean that's certainly one of the initiatives we've seen some of our customers implement. Is with, you know, results oriented environment rather than, you know, strict adherence to you must be online or you must be, you know, at your desk from 9 till 5, because it doesn't work for everybody, and that's, look, males, females included, but specifically females, where the majority of the kind of caregiving responsibilities fall to. Like I think, as Nils was saying earlier about setting meetings at specific times. So perhaps, Neil, you said a good point before we started filming this, but you know, it's an initiative about kind of timings of meetings and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I know it from my friends in Scandinavia, where you know, it's a big no-no to have any meeting scheduled after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, unless it's really urgent and necessary. But the default position is that you keep the later afternoon free to pick up kids. I mean, that is not just you know, in relation to women, but I mean, many of my friends are male, and they pick up their kids. So you know, it's about making you know, things flexible, as Johannes said. So I mean, adjusting to today's realities, and at the same time, people who pick up their kids at 3, they don't expect to not work in the evening. So they are happy to, as they can be, to open up the laptop again once the kids are in bed and start working. So I mean, making things flexible makes it so much easier for everyone, and that also definitely increases productivity. And I mean, these are things that don't even cost money. And then the other point, of course, that we haven't touched on before, but it's also, of course, the pay gap, which is a hard factor. And be aggressive about communicating and also enforcing it internally to make sure that people on the same experience and skills level are getting the same kind of money. Huh? Because de facto it's not happening today. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a massive pay gap.
And that gap's around 22% as well from the statistics, that there's females on average receiving 22% less salary than their equivalent male in the same job, which is a hard stat and quite shocking really to see.
Victoria, I mean, if you I'd be interested to know in your kind of experience, what you may have seen, either you are implementing at SQUAKE, or plan to implement at SQUAKE, or alternatively you've seen peers and maybe competitors or other companies, other brands out there doing in the same sector. So what have you seen personally?
Yeah, not a very good question. There's two things I think we touched upon before on having flexible working policies and being loud about it within the company, within the team, but also outside whenever we have a job posting out there, to emphasize again that we'll be here to create the working condition that works for each person depending on their life, their personality, whatsoever. But I think another thing which is very important is to prove that you walk the talk. And so for me, it's been networking. Leighton and I met recently in Berlin at a networking event, and having these conversations face to face to say, hey, this is my experience as a female in that company, encourages others to say, hey, that's not just on paper, it's a real thing. And I think there's a lot to be done. And I think it links also back to what we were saying earlier on focusing on what you can control. What you can control is your immediate community. And so if you communicate with your community, you tell them that it's happening and that this is something which is for real, then you can encourage people to at least feel comfortable to apply. Because I've heard so many of my friends or women in my network telling me, I don't want to start a company because I want to be a mother at some point, or I don't want to apply to that startup because there's a hustle culture, I'm not sure I can do this. It's all these stereotypes that you need to break, and you can break them by being an advocate for the way you consider creating an inclusive workplace at your company.
Yeah, look, great point. I think I can take some comfort and reassurance in knowing that certainly in the area, the end of the market in which we operate, which is early stage startup, scale up businesses, where all of you guys, all of you operate at that kind of level as well. It's almost a given that there's this flexibility, and and there's this kind of, I suppose it's like an outcome based work culture. So you talked about the hustle mentality, etc. The hustle is still there. But the hustle isn't, as Michael touched on earlier, isn't necessarily starting at 9 and finishing at 6, or starting at whatever. It's more so, this is the objective. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is the part you play within within the business, within the I suppose the wider the wider environment. And our expectation is that you're going to deliver on that. And if you choose to deliver on that by, as Nils said earlier, by picking your children up, for instance, but then logging on again once the children have been put to bed and what have you, as long as you're delivering, ultimately that's all that's important. Aina, I'd be interested, I know you and MOWEA are still quite early stage and still quite small, but is there certain things that you guys over there are doing and putting into place now with a view to when you scale, these foundations will already be laid?
Yeah, sure. I also agree with what was previously said about flexible working hours and all of that. But one thing that in our company changed the whole picture and the approach is that when we had a woman in a board of directors who is directly responsible for talent acquisition, and that's how I think the number of female employees increased. It's not 50-50 yet, but it was mainly male dominated team, though quite diverse in terms of different nationalities. But I think I was one of 2 women in a team of maybe 10 or 12 people. and now it's 19 employees, and I think 7 or 8 of them are women. And yeah, a new a female employee is joining next week. So yeah, so once we had a decision maker who is female, it really changed what we have right now. Yeah,
I think that definitely. Is just to add to that, because I think you're pointing something out that is really important, and those are the role models. You need them within the company, and you need them outside of the company. And when we look into social media or press or whatever, we have a lot of loud men who are just pitching their story, and we have very few loud women. And that's just, of course, giving a signal to the market. And the same happens when you are inside of the team. We're very happy with, like, right now we are around at like a third of the team is female, and we are very tech focused. So we have very few positions actually outside of product or tech. So if a female developer sees that team setting, it's a completely different story than if you would have 10 guys sitting there. So it's, of course, it's an indirect signal, but it's also a direct signal, because obviously it works. So pushing role models, I think, is something that we can also, as a startup community, that's something that we could pitch harder, that we could bring forward, communicating this actively, bringing role models in the public. But of course, they have to want it as well. I mean, we don't want to push anyone to something they don't want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, because what we've found is that when we are interviewing, we're qualifying candidates, specifically female candidates, one of the first questions that we get from them is, what's the makeup of the team? Are there any other females within the team? And so it's, where you can, if there are several females within the team already, there's already a level of comfort. Even better if there's a female line manager, so someone that they can see that is, in a leadership role, that is promoted, because it just demonstrates that women are valued and respected within the organization, and there's career advancement opportunities. Without saying anything, it just speaks volumes. And then as a follow-up to that one, what you can do as well to just help with that candidate journey, and from a recruitment perspective, is make sure that when they're coming in or they're interviewed by a female member of staff. So like you said, Johannes, we need perhaps some loud females, even females that we're not necessarily wanting to be kind of pushing right up the corporate ladder, but if they're happy to interview a prospective candidate, that in itself, again, without it's just the right message to send, that we really value women within the business.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and sometimes it's easier said than done. So I think it all starts with the right intentions, and then communicating the right intentions. If I go back to what Johannes said earlier on, is that we're talking about early stage businesses. So if the 2 or the 3 founders of said business happen to be men, then that kind of sets the nucleus of the business. So then when they want to then go out there and grow and start bringing making it more diverse and bringing additional people in, etc., they're not going to be able to necessarily get a female to be part of the interview process, because there isn't a female in this instance in that particular company. But more so, it's about the intention of, we recognize that this is where we're at the moment, this is where we plan to be, this is how we think it will look, and these are the measures that we're putting in place, and the initiatives and whatnot to try and, I suppose, promote and encourage that diversity. Has anyone got anything else to add in terms of what more could be done? I mean, I'm interested to see if what people's thoughts are on maybe some I don't know, like perhaps like government intervention. If there's anything, we talked about a lack of females studying the STEM subjects anyway, and out of those females studying STEM subjects, actually moving into roles which are broadly related to what they studied. I mean, do you think that there could be more some intervention at like a federal level?
I mean, I can make a short one out of that. It's personally, I'm not a big fan of putting the responsibility onto others. But of course, when it comes to framework and governance and creating a society that enables flexibility and all these things, the colleagues from the government can help as well. But I think what would really help us in general is transparency. If we push transparency more actively, and let's say you have a ranking, of the startups, and it's public, kind of like a transparency register, and everybody can look up, those are just facts. So everybody can work on those facts, and if you give yourself a little bit to, you want to be up in the ranking, well, do your homework. So transparency always creates urgency.
Yeah, I
think
agree
with what Johannes was saying. Just sorry, Leighton, to interrupt.
No.
I agree with you. Like, we can't put all on government. I think we need them to support and help with when they found some schools or when they communicate about opportunities as a career. I'm also making a parallel. I'm a board member on the side, but totally different companies. But I became a board member 9 years ago because I'm a woman, because Europe enforced women quota at boards, right? And so it does work at the end of the day. So I think it needs to it's about finding the right balance there. And how do you want government to put quotas in education? Not going to happen. But I think there's a role to be played, and it needs to be in close collaboration with the private sector and job market, definitely.
You're right. It's not down for governments necessarily to govern the individual companies, but what they can do is they can drive certain standards. And we talk about transparency. The governments can drive equal pay. They can drive transparency across, and the way to ensure equal pay is to drive transparency across what people are being paid at what levels in what particular business. So you're aware of what your competitors and what your peers are paying, and what that does is it keeps everyone honest, and it keeps everyone equal, and it pushes up the the mean average. So that's from my perspective, I think that's a really important part that government can play.
Yeah, and perhaps work with some nudging rather than setting rules. Giving perhaps tax credits to those who are closest to 50%, so that gives an incentive to start in the right way from the beginning, because as we also said before, it's quite often a old boys network that creates a company, and to get out of the old boys club to make it into a diverse company is not so easy, as you guys just said, and from your experience in recruiting, when there's 4 boys or 4 guys, then it's more difficult to attract female talent. And so probably, or not just probably, but definitely better if you have a diverse group of founders from the beginning, which will then guide the way for the future as well.
Yeah. So look, Thomas, I can see that you've joined after some networking issues. Obviously, we've covered quite a lot of ground here now, Thomas. But if I could ask you just to give a very brief sort of introduction into yourself and your business, and then what makes sense is I'll probably pose a couple of the questions that we've been discussing to you directly to get your opinion and your take on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve, Leighton, and Michael, and hi everyone. Sorry for being late, and I was not meant to be disrespectful. We had a complete shutdown here in our building, no electricity, no network, nothing.
Wow.
And we were afraid that our website was also down, so quite a bit of a panicky situation here, but we got it solved. So my apologies for being late. Yeah, so I mean, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Circulee. We are basically enabling companies to use pre-owned IT professionally. So we deliver, let's say, enterprise-grade used hardware. We source exclusively from IT leasing environments, and we have essentially worked over the past year to deliver build a process that delivers the right quality for companies to use pre-owned hardware to not lose performance while yet saving CO2, e-waste, and money. We essentially cater to small to mid-sized businesses. We're very consciously not going after large businesses because they have typically access to leasing. They have access to their own, let's say, pre-owned pools, right? Once you reach a certain size, you have enough, let's say, idle laptops and devices. But our goal really is to convert new buyers to pre-owned buyers. And we're trying to deliver essentially a solution that works for businesses, not just for end consumers. And everybody who's bought essentially pre-owned hardware for them personally, they will understand that the expectations and let's say the quality requirements from a B2B standard for a company is a very different one than selling to end consumers. So that's the challenge that we're going after. I think you were already discussing, I think, one really important topic that is also for me as a CEO of a 30 people company now based in Berlin. A challenge is to attract also a diverse team. We have in our management team composed of 6 people, 1 female team member. She is actually going into maternity leave this week. Literally, we just made the announcement earlier today that she will be going into maternity leave. She's going to be essentially represented by her subordinate, who is again a male, right? So we're going to have now for a few months a male-only management team. That is obviously not inspiring, and it's not what we should have as a management team. So of course, on all other roles, and we're consciously really looking for female talent. We're trying to do our best to attract female talent, and we believe that we stick to, I think, the premises of fair and equitable hiring, right? Of course, we make very sure that and our HR team is actually led by a woman to make sure that there's no salary discrepancies, but we're also very consciously trying to promote and encourage essentially career paths also for female. I will say though, when I started the company a bit more than a year ago, it was really difficult for me to fill key roles with female professionals. We're not, a crazy founder-led company that has developed an idea in the garage like Steve Jobs or any like that. We're professional hires, so we're working together with a strategic investor, and we had a certain amount of recruiting budget. We worked with the recruiter to also attract female talent, and it was very difficult to do that, especially for engineering roles, for operations roles, with the right seniority. That said, it is something that we're concerned about. It's something that I'm personally concerned about, and I will say a small anecdote. I grew up in a family where it was my mom, who was born 1942, who actually was the breadwinner in our family. Essentially, it's a woman who effectively played, quote unquote, the traditional man role. And so I grew up in an environment where it is very normal to have essentially women at the leadership table and leadership position. And my mom was a great source of inspiration for me. But I will say that, and now we're back to the conversation, it's been difficult for us here, even in Berlin, to attract, at the right seniority with the right experience, female leaders.
Thanks for your opinion on that, Thomas. I mean, I'd just like to elaborate, because obviously you weren't part of the earlier conversation, but so you've identified that there is not necessarily a problem, but you've identified that it needs addressing the D&I gap there, the gender gap. What are you guys doing over at Circulee to I don't know, make your environment and make your roles more appealing to women, to attract women into the business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of conscious decisions we've made, right? Making sure that also really our HR function is led by a woman. The other part was what I mentioned before, to make sure that we had at least female representation in the senior management team. We work with a hybrid model. We want to give our employees, our entire team, as much flexibility as possible, right? And if there are, and I'm referring to now our head of product, who's now going into maternity, she was able to really work even the past weeks, I think, fully to her liking, to giving her as much flexibility as possible, right? With anyone in the rest of the team having any questions or doubts around that. and we very consciously try to hire in every function also female members. So I would say that very likely, or I'd say in a nutshell, these are probably the very conscious efforts we've done. Of course, when we recruit, right, one of the filters that we apply is to say, if we have, the same experience, right, and the same sort of quote unquote potential, we would always prioritize a woman, right? That is, if in a like for comparison between two candidates, we would prioritize a woman. And that is a very official policy, right? That is something that we very openly talk about. Now, some people may say, "Oh, this is, that's actually, not what's how you should deal with the issue." We believe it's probably one of the most effective means to essentially have female representation at the table. But I would say these are probably, in a nutshell, those efforts that we've done very consciously and made decisions on.
And have you got specific targets that you're aiming for, or broadly speaking, are we looking at like 50-50 in an ideal world?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's something I would love. I think that's everybody in the company. We're a small team, right? We have all very open discussions about that. We haven't really officially set a fixed number because honestly, it's not something that, is kind of actually productive, really. It's about what we do is in every role, we will prioritize female candidates if they have the same requirements, right? If they have what it takes to fill the role. We have not set an official standard. We do obviously look at that, right? We have about a 30% female in the company, right, across all ranks. But what's for me, quite honestly, the biggest challenge is to find at the senior management level, right, at the senior level, to find female candidates. That's really, I think, the where we're struggling at the moment. But totally fair question. I think the question does trigger. For me, at least, the reflection should be really setting official targets. Would that actually help? So maybe that's a conversation we need to have as a team.
And if I may build upon what you were saying, Thomas, I think what's interesting is most people were asked like a percentage of how many women do you have in the company, when in my opinion, the right question is not how many, it's where they are in the company. Because number one, female-led roles in a startup, HR, communications, right? And so that would be easy. If you look at your product team, your tech team, your IT team, where's that number? And I think we mentioned that earlier, like it's to look at all the levels of the company. I'll take our example. We have 2 male founders. Then right underneath them, we have 75% women-led department. But then one level above, it's men again, a lot. And so how you find the balance at every level and through all, the pillars of the company, I think this is tricky, but this is probably the way to look at it.
I think one of I think in closing, Leighton, I think we're kind of running out of time now, but and we're going to drop off. But just one thing I wanted to mention was about communication. Victoire, you kind of you touched on that a little bit earlier, but across the board, everybody here, some fantastic initiatives. It's obviously on everybody's radar, making direct steps to to help address that. But actually communicating that to the outside world is imperative, because actually everybody's got great initiatives. Certainly ClimateTech focus, all of our customers, all of our people we speak to, but actually how do you communicate that? And the reason why I can think of an example, so my wife is in recruitment, she works for a big corporate bank, but they've got some fantastic maternity benefits. So they've got like really great maternity policy. They've also got like an emergency childcare service. So if your childminder is ill, for example, or nursery's closed, there's actually an alternative that means you can take your child to daycare, and then you can work as well. So it's things like that there are great, but they're not really communicating that effectively. So making sure it's front and center in the job description. Perhaps when you work with a recruiter like 40 or somebody else, perhaps when their approach is made to a female, it might be different to how you approach a male in that respect, because we know that certain topics are more important to different people, race, gender, etc. So there's a lot. I mean, there's lots of ways in which we can do and improve that communication, and just shout about all the great things that you are doing within your own businesses to kind of help attract females. So I think, look, Leighton, I think that's probably a nice closing note, right?
Yep.
And you know, I think I'll hand it back to you to kind of to wrap it up.
Not much more to say other than thank you all very much for jumping on this. It's look, we appreciate your time and giving up what's turned out to be best part of 45 minutes of your day when we promised it would be about 30. We know time is money, so thanks for jumping on that, but also your contribution. Look, everyone contributed. Everyone's kind of really thought about the question, and I'll just reiterate, I feel personally that it's really encouraging that it's on the agenda, it's on the radar, and even though some businesses may be small in number, it's getting the right foundations and the right processes in place when you're small, so then when you go on to scale, the culture's there, and it's already built. So look, thank you very much, guys. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.